Today on the podcast, we're back in Scotland with another longtime hasher that many of you may know. It looks like one of my horns is showing, but not both of them. Anyhow, today, welcome on the podcast, Blind Doug. Welcome.
Thank you.
Blind Doug, let's tell everybody your hashing origin story. When, where, and how did you get to your first hash?
That actually predates the first hash, but I first became aware of hashing through an Aberdeen hasher called JC. He doesn't travel much, but he worked for Shell out in the Far East. And I worked with this guy in Marathon Oil. And when he left, I had a party at his house, and he did something bizarre. He had a run before the party, which I'd never thought of that as a good idea. So I was curious. So I turned up his house a wee bit early, and I missed the run. I wasn't into running. And they were all congregated in his garage singing silly songs. And I thought to myself, I can't get my head around this at all. And then a year and a half, 2 years later, I found myself in Jakarta, and I discovered that everybody and his dog was hashing. Mondays was the management meeting, and I was only ever at that if I was standing in for my boss. And even the boss, the country manager, he would go to the ladies' hash, the Wednesday night hash in Jakarta. So my first hash was the ladies' hash in Jakarta.
And that was called the Jakarta Harriets.
Yeah, Jakarta Harriets, yeah, Wednesday. I'll never forget when I'd only been there a few weeks, and some of the male hashers were going on about the hash thrash, which I didn't really know what it was about. But one of the Harriets said to me, "Would you like to come to my pussy spree?" And I thought, I'm not sure what that is, but I like the sound of it.
What year was that?
That was 1991.
Okay. And what was it like in 91 in terms of pack size, what Jakarta was like? How far did you have to go to get out away from the city?
Right. Yeah, good questions, because that's why it's got since my day. We would have regularly 50 odd people. There was a men's hash in Jakarta on the Monday night, regular, and that was a singing hash. There was a ladies' hash on a Wednesday, and there was Batavia. I thought of itself as a drinking hash, and it was all about accusations and stuff. And they all stood around with bibs on because they all seemed to be drooling, and as they got older, they seemed to feel worse.
It's great. Well, 91, Jakarta had been well established then.
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah, by 1990. Do you remember who were any of the elders that were there when you arrived in Jakarta on the hash?
Oh, yes, how could I forget that the guy who'd run most runs at Jakarta Hash, the Monday night hash, was a guy that I think you might be familiar with. He goes by the moniker Penguin.
The Penguin, sure. So
Yeah,
he was still there in 91, okay.
he was
Anybody
still there,
else?
but for about the first 1 or 2 years I was there. But let me just get back to the Monday night hash. The reason I ended up at that was I hadn't have been long in Jakarta. And as happens, the jungle drums get going, and this chemical salesman came to see me. And it turned out he was a hasher. And he said, "Are you familiar with the hash?" I said, "I went to the ladies' hash last week." And he said to me, "What the hell are you going to the ladies' hash for? There's a men's hash on a Monday night." I said, "Oh, I don't know anything about that. I'm only just here." He says, "I'll take you." So he took me to the hash on the Monday night. And that was the last time I saw him. He got deported. But
And
that first time going was enough for me. And I thought I was back the next week. And there I met all the usual suspects. And there was a guy there called Dr. Jerker. And he said, "Any newbies here that have got empty freezers? We've got a family away weekend thing, and we're looking for some place to store some burgers and sausages and all that good stuff." So I put my hand up, and his message came round the next day. And when you saw we had 3 freezers in this place, she was back for 3 days in a row, and we ended up with all the food for the first family hash weekend.
what was that like? How far away was a family hash weekend? In town, out of town?
That was down at Pelabu and Ratu on the south coast. I look back and realize how brave I was that I decided to drive there myself without having a driver. And I just bought a vehicle, a Kijang. I think the driver of the previous owner had swapped batteries. Lay at the house for about 3 days. And when I went to drive down, the battery was completely flat. So I thought, oh shit, I've got all the food for the whole weekend here. So I got on to the office. I'd only been there a few weeks. And fortunately, they got me in charge. A guy called Mike Moots, who was A&F manager, American guy. And he says, I'll come round with my driver. And he took me down some alleyways to Block A. And we managed to get ourselves a battery. So set off a bit late to get down to Pelaboo and Ratu. By that stage, they were ready to do the run and wondered where the hell I was with all the food. And I managed to get the vehicle stuck in a sand drift trying to get down to this place. So anyway, that was a baptism of fire. The GM, when that first year I was there at Monday Night Hash, was Paul Hogan. Sadly died. I don't know if you ever met Paul. Good guy, entertaining, amusing guy. Other guys who were GMs while I was there was Lewis Turner, Inspector Gadget. He lives in Perth. Like a lot of the Jakarta guys live in Perth. Hardcase, Dave Finlay. In fact, I went and stayed with him on my way to New Zealand Nash Hash this year. He's the GM of Hammersley at the moment. And Chris Beebe, a whole bunch of them. Joe Hawksworth. Yeah, a lot of interesting characters.
For Jakarta, then, what was the circle like? How long was it compared to Batavia and so on?
The men's circle could go on forever. The contrast between the men's hash and the women's hash was quite particularly noticeable. The women would always stop at, let me think, 7:30, that was it, done, and they were off. The men's hash sometimes could last 2 hours, could last even longer, depending on who was still standing.
How long did it take before you were setting trails and being a hare?
That was pretty quick because, again, this guy Jerker, he also asked one of the times, wait a minute, how long ago was that? Actually, there's a guy in Jakarta, John Carter, he would be able to tell you. His hash name is Vatican Rag. And I saw him for the first time in 30 years at the Jakarta Hash 50th anniversary. He was there. What I hadn't realized, or so he told me, because they couldn't find me in the system. They hadn't got me quite right in the system. Anyway, we managed to get that sorted out. He told me he has a touch of Asperger's, so his spreadsheets are just right. He says, I can even tell you where you had your hair the first time, you co-haired, and which on you went to. He's got all that stuff. A bit
Nice.
anal, shall we say.
Yeah, Jakarta has a lot of records. Were they distributing the hash trash write-ups by
Yeah.
hand then?
Yeah, what you had to do was you had to go to, there was various bars around town. I used to go to Mama's Kitchen, which is directly opposite Chemchecks, which is the supermarket. I used to pick it up on a Saturday morning. And in those days as well, to go to the run site, of course, my GPS was just coming out when we were there. Obviously, no 3 words or anything like that. So there was hash signs. So you get roughly in the area, and then you had to drive around, and you would see a wooden arrow with HHH on it, or JHHH, and you followed those at every junction until eventually you got to the run site.
And apart from like the yearbooks and things like that, were people taking photos?
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
for
yeah.
women's hair?
Yeah, hash flash. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I've still got the yearbook somewhere upstairs.
Cool. What about getting into mismanagement? Did they put you on right away? Son?
No, I'd been there about 3 years and I was hash cash 1 year. But it's 2.5 years I was there. I was in the office and then ended up going offshore as the operations superintendent in charge of the field. So at that point, I missed 50% of the run. So I didn't quite complete hash cash because I couldn't be there every week. So I did the first year, then somebody else had to take over.
So in that span of those first 3 years, say, was Jakarta changing or construction? What was it like then at the beginning of the decade?
Very much changing in a variety of ways. And the thing that would struck me as most noticeable was when I arrived at first, people would not talk about the family. So Suharto was in power. And I would hear the local people would be grumbling about various things, but the family was never mentioned. The government, various other people, but they weren't mentioned. By the time I was leaving, there was a lot of unrest and dissatisfaction, especially about Tommy Suharto. And the fact that these guys were creaming money off and they were sticking it in your face, very obviously. That was causing a lot of resentment. When I arrived at first, the electricity supply was pretty poor. We got regular power cuts. And by the time I left, that had improved. And the traffic, I was there when they brought out the 3-in-1 system. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Because it get the traffic downtown, down Dearman was the main drag, and we were on, our office was on Rasuna side. They decided they're going to operate this system called the 3-in-1. You weren't allowed to go into this exclusion zone unless you had 3 people in your car. So most people had drivers. So you had a driver, yourself, and you had to have a partner, a passenger. So overnight, it generated a whole new industry because there'd be all these kids would be standing at the exclusion zone. When you're thinking about now with pedophilia and all the rest of it, all these kids would be there. Guys would open the door, kid would jump in the car and drive downtown, and then they give him some money and he had to get a badge eye or something or whatever and get back up to the exclusions. However, there was all a bit nervy at the time. At the time, I remember it was reported where somebody dropped somebody off in the exclusion zone, and instead of going out, did a U-turn, which meant there was only 2 people in the car, and it was reported, could be an urban myth, that a cop pulled out a gun and shot the back window out in the car.
Wow. That's
Well,
great. That's a good story to make up if they want to keep enforcing the.
yeah, I had a cop unholstering his gun at me one time. That's another story.
Let's just get one more thing about those early days. Were people coming in, visitors, office workers coming through, and was there a change over the hash in the terms of 3 years about how many people came and went that changed the makeup?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of people obviously there like a long time, like Ronnie and so on, been there for decades. And there were some people who would disappear for a couple of years, maybe go to Australia or something, and then would come back. In fact, when I went back to Jakarta, it was noticeable. Back in 2016, when it was Interhash in Bali, and I ran with Batavia Hash, I was surprised to see so many familiar faces that were there. And unfortunately, quite a few have died since then, but there was quite a cohort that had been there for decades.
Yeah.
At the same time, there is always a bit of churn. People are there for a short period of time and they're away. And then you got other people like Froggy Park who would turn up on a regular basis and stay for a month or something and disappear again and then come back again and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool gambit.
So you were there the first appointment.
5 years I was there.
Were you collecting T-shirts at those first years?
Yeah, I think Jakarta Hash, that's actually the ladies' hash. You got a T-shirt almost, it was like 2 runs out of 3. So I gave a lot of them away, but I came back with well over 100 because I did something like, I just actually looked at my levers mug. According to this, I did 130 runs, bearing in mind I missed half of them for the last 2.5 years I was there, and I did about 70 with the ladies' hash, maybe about 10 with Batavia, and there was TGIF, and there was also a horrors hash, kids hash. I didn't get in for that, but my children have all got levers mugs. Yeah, loads and loads of hash T-shirts and shorts and sarongs and all the rest of it. And some folk were pretty nifty with some of the clothes. Don't know if you ever met Jack the Stick. He was a dab hand at turning sarongs into pajamas.
Who were some of the ladies? Any long-term, was Suzanne Teen there?
Mm-hmm. That story, the ladies' hash one time, thanks to her, I ended up in SOS Medica. I would get it down one time, and I've got a couple of false teeth, little play. And I was up against some woman who was famous for hoovering up the beer. And so I tried to hoover it up as well and wash that flake out and it got stuck in my throat. At which point somebody had to do the Nelson thing on me and try to get it out, but I ended up swallowing the thing. And this caused a lot of concern. So Suzanne was the RA that night. And I went to SOS Medica and explained how the pink part and the white part of this little plate had a little steel pin that held it together. So they x-rayed it to find it, and sure enough, they found it in my stomach and said, okay, come back in 5 days or whatever it is, and we'll see if it's gone. And of course, this got around the office because there were a few guys there from the office were there, and they were all taking bets how long it was before I was able to discharge this thing. So it turned out that there was a kind of psychological reaction where my sphincter refused to operate for several days. I just clammed up on me, a bit apprehensive. And then, as happens in this part of the world, I ended up with some loose bowels in the middle of the night. During a power cut, I went to the toilet and I thought I better have a look here and see if I can see anything. So I was there with a torch trying to see in amongst the muck and I couldn't see anything. And so when I went back to get the third time to get an X-ray. They said it's gone. We don't know where it is, but it's gone. So I was just relieved at that. So yeah, that's all Suzanne's fault.
Oh, yeah, maybe that's good. You didn't have to deal with them by putting that thing back in my mouth at some point.
No,
Yeah.
definitely not.
Where did you go 5 years later?
I decided to go home. I actually quit out there, which is probably not the most sensible thing. But we wanted to come back for my daughter's education, do her final year of primary school. My 3 kids were all there. And my missus wanted to actually have a career. So that was the motivation. I would say we'd stay another year. And serendipity, about 2 weeks later, a friend of mine sent, would you believe, a telex, that shows how long ago, a telex saying, did I know anybody that might fit this job description? Just 2 weeks after we decided we would go home. And so I ended up going back 6 months earlier than I'd originally planned, came to Edinburgh. We obviously left Aberdeen. And I realized, listening to my kids and all the rest of it, they all had expectations of slotting back in where they left. And I thought, you know what, it'd be a lot easier if we go someplace they've never been. And I'll just have to do what I need to do so that they don't have to change education or anything like that. So we came back to Edinburgh, and I think it was the best move I've ever made in my life. I like living here.
Yeah, very cool. What traveling did you do from Jakarta for hashing outside of Indonesia or outside at least the island?
It's interesting enough, I didn't do a lot of hashing externally, apart from one I do remember very distinctly. Decided to go to Beijing. There was a couple of teachers had been in Beijing and they arrived in Jakarta. And I thought, go and check this out. So I went to Beijing, and this must have been something like 94 or 95. And in those days, you had to stay in Hong Kong for 3 days to get a visa, and Deng Xiaoping was on the go. Uh, Beijing was like Casablanca. It was a lot of interesting characters were there at the time. I always traveled with a hash t-shirt on, and we were staying at the Lido, Holiday Inn Lido in Beijing. At the time, it was somewhere at the biggest hotel in Asia. I arrived and always went at the back in case kids dropped toys and stuff. And these 2 women blew in from the Gobi Desert. And one of them looked at me and says, "Oh, you're a hasher." And I said, "Yeah, I am. I'm looking for the Beijing hash. Are you a hasher?" He says, "No, I'm not. But I think I know somebody who is. What's your room number?" So I gave him my room number. I arrive at the room just as the phone rings. My wife goes, "Hey, what's this all about? There's some strange woman looking for you." And so I said, "Okay, can you find out where the hash is?" And she says, "Mexican wave." And I says, "Mexican wave, what's that?" She says, "I don't know. That's up to you to find out." Put the phone down, which meant I had a week to find out where it was. Hardly anybody spoke any English. There were no signs in English. The metro at the time was like the circular line in London with 2 separate little spurs, but that was it. They had a granite obelisk on the platform, and all the lettering was black apart from the station. It was in gold, the grand things. I went to concierge every day, asking Mexican wave, and says, "No, we've got Mexican restaurants here, we've got here, this, here, and that kind of restaurants." And eventually, after 5 days, this guy goes, "Mexican wave, yeah, it's a restaurant." I said, "Where is it?" And he drew a circle, and it was about 5 square miles. And I thought, okay, this is it. So my wife took the kids back to the zoo to see the pandas, and I set up at 7 in the morning in the Sunday to go and try and find this. And I got down into this area, and I was wandering around, and I stumbled across, would you believe, the Canadian Embassy. And I sidled on up to the guard and said, "I know you're not supposed to speak, but I'm looking for the Mexican wave." And he goes, "You're quite right, sir. I'm not allowed to speak, but 3rd row on the left, 4th on the right." And
Well,
it's
how, were you? Was anybody there? Were you early?
no, I got there half an hour before the run started, and there was loads and loads of people there. And it was a cultural experience in lots and lots of ways. Most of the people I met there that day all had a gap in their life story when they would sit down with a beer and tell me, how did you get here? And they all had like 5 years, 10 years, 12-year gaps that they didn't want to talk about. That's what I was saying. It was like Casablanca, but it's so dynamic.
Nice.
And I met this Scottish guy whose family had moved to Vancouver when he was like 12. And he had a 10-year gap in his life. They told him this up. He owned a bar in Beijing. And I said, "Really?" I said, "In Indonesia, a fervently anti-communist country, we're not allowed to do that. We have to have a 51% partner kind of thing." He says, "No, I've got 80% of this." I said, "What's the chance of you getting your money out?" He says, "I just have." said, really? He says, yeah, I've sold the bar and I bought another one in a better location. So I've reinvested it. I said, but you got the money in your account and all that stuff. Go, yeah, no problem at all. I thought, wow, I need to get my head around this. And there was quite a few folk had businesses then. And you could see it was dynamic, but you didn't know politically which way it was going to go at the time. But it was just,
Yeah.
I think there was an edge to the place.
Yeah, I went there just before they hosted the Olympics and they were demolishing places, but the Hash had a bar there. One of the Hashers owned a bar and they had changed then. So that was 2008. They had, oh, what was it? Yeah. They had changed to meet at the same bar every week. So you
Yeah.
would meet there and sometimes travel off to run from there. Yeah. Neat. Okay. You were traveling. Now you're back in Scotland.
Yeah.
How did you land hashing there?
That's another little story. So for 7 years when I got home, I did nothing. I just let my ass get bigger. And then my eldest son went to Newcastle Uni down in the north of England. And that day, the Great North Run was being run. And it's probably the biggest half marathon in certainly in the north of England. So I can't remember, 30,000 people or something, whatever it is. And he turned to me and he says, hey, Dad, how do you fancy running this? And I thought, okay, you organize it and we'll give it a shot. And at that point, I thought, I better start running again. And so it so happened that Edinburgh TNT Hash were having 1,000 run that year. And so I started running with TNT and then I started running with EH3 on a Sunday as well.
Who was
So
there then?
who was there? A lot of the same
Oh,
suspects.
no.
Gin Bin, Mongoose, Monsoon Drain. Yeah. Or the brewer, Charlie the brewer. Of course, without him, the whole thing would die a death. Keeps the whole show in the run. Septic, Megasaurus, Abby. Yeah. Yeah, all these characters, they were there when I arrived. And Oral Sex, in fact, she was the first person to talk to me. I turned up at what was the name of the bar now? The one near Murrayfield, Rugby. And I wandered in, feeling a bit self-conscious, and she would prompt at the bar and she says, are you here for the hash? And I said, I certainly am. She said, pleased to meet you, I'm Oral Sex. And I thought, okay, this is getting good. No, I always love her for that, for putting me at ease. It's like when you're just a stranger in town.
Nice. Did you get in shape running? What kind of shape did you get in because of your son then?
Yeah, I suddenly found myself enjoying it and running on a regular basis. And then eventually my brother-in-law said to me, oh, there's a 10K on in Edinburgh. How would you like to run with this? So I had no idea what was a sustainable pace because, of course, with hashing, you run for a bit, you stop, you look around. And so I ran a 10K with him. And I just ran off like a loony. And he was shouting to slow down. And about 5 kilometres in, he ran past me and I never saw him again. So it took me 3 or 4 attempts at 10Ks. And then I decided to run a half marathon. And there's one from my house I can run down the Waterloo Leith all the way down to Leith off road. It's quite a good one. But I was stupid. The day beforehand, I laid a turf. And so I was doing a lot of squatting. And so my very first half marathon I tried to run, I got a mile in and I pulled the muscle. But being stupid, I decided that as I saw them disappearing at the horizon, I'm going to do this. And I ended up with sciatica. I finished it, but I ended up with sciatica and I thought, I'm never doing that again. And then when I was about 57, I decided, and I have no idea what happened. I think somebody drugged me. I decided to do my first marathon when I was 57. No idea why. I can't explain it at all. It was not one of my better ideas. While I was training for my first marathon, I had a heart attack.
Jeez.
Yeah, but I hadn't really realized it. It was up in Aberdeen, training with some fell runners, and the temperature was -9, and it's the cold weather. I'm trying to keep up with some of the older women and struggling in the cold conditions. And it was 5 months later, I went down to see, I eventually got away from working full-time in Shell, back down to my doctor. And it said, normally, I would just, you're coming to see me 5 months after the event. I was always blow you away, but you'll get the thinnest folder in the practice. We better have a look at you. And he said, we'll go do an ECG. And I said, well, I've got one from when I had my 40th in Singapore. I'll bring it along. And I couldn't read it, but I could see there was a hell of a difference between the one he had taken and the one I'd had from years ago. And I saw the cardiologist and I said, I've got a marathon coming up in 3 weeks' time. What do you think? And he said, your heart's a muscle. Like all muscles, it should be exercised. The worst thing you can do is be a couch potato. He says, but it's a marathon runner, you should know that. And he says, no, one thing, I'm not a marathon runner yet. I was just training. He said, just listen to your body. So with some trepidation and being an idiot, I ran my first marathon 3 weeks after being diagnosed with a heart attack. In those days, there was not the Garmins and stuff, with Garmins, but you had to have the chest strap and the thing. So I listened to my body a bit. And that year, I don't know if it was incompetence or what, but, or a conspiracy, but there were no pallets of water from the 16 miles to 22 miles. They claimed somebody stripped the pallets of water. I think it was a bit of mismanagement. Must have been hashers in charge. Anyway, I ended up getting cramp and I ended up having to walk in the last 4 minutes, but I finished it. And that's, I'm going to come back next year. I'm going to do more training and do better. So ultimately ended up doing 4 marathons after being diagnosed with a heart attack. Never thought. But,
And that make hashing more fun? Being in that kind of
yeah, definitely. And last year when I went to New Zealand Nash Hash and Australia Nash Hash, I did the ball breakers. I usually try to do the ball breakers. People look at me, who's this old fat boy? And I think it was Euro Hash. And the guy told me under no circumstances should I do the ball breaker. I said, he doesn't realize how tenacious I am. So anyway, yes, no, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what about mismanagement of hashing in Scotland
Yeah.
for you?
Well, I've been GM of TNT Hash and I've been GM of EX3. And I had the joy of taking H3 back out of COVID restrictions. So I was Inspector Goss with the GM when they had to shut down. And I was the GM that brought us out back running again. And I thought I was done with things like risk assessments and all that stuff. On the basis here, you could get a £10,000 fine for breaking the law and bringing the hash into disrepute and all that stuff. I would be personally liable, and so would the hash. I thought I've got to take this seriously. And you could do online COVID officer bloody things, and I talked to the other people into doing it. And I made sure they were compliant as we eased out of COVID. So that's another experience.
Yeah. For COVID, any lasting impact on either of those two clubs?
No, we're pretty much back to where we are, but I think some folks, probably including myself, we have some kind of lasting damage from having COVID.
Yeah.
In fact, would you believe I got COVID and it was mega sore? She had a 50th birthday party and was about 20 of us all got a super sharer event. When I got COVID the first time, but it was the second time on an EH3 hard ski trip. There was about 50 of us and half of us all got COVID. And that one was longer lasting, where it seems to attack whatever the weakness is in your body. And obviously for me, it was my heart. So for about 3 months afterwards, every time I took exercise, my heart rate would shoot up. I had a lot of trouble actually turning it down. Then after 3 months, it disappeared. And then about 6 months later, it came back for a couple of months.
Once you got to UK or back to Scotland, anyhow, you talked about your kids getting older and going to school, and it sounds like you started traveling with hashing a bit more.
Yes.
So where did you start launching, and what are the regulars for you?
First events were UK type events. I went to the Surrey 1500, the Hertfordshire 1000, the Essex 1000, and I met some of those characters like Windsock and Mr. X and all these kind of people, which is also another cultural experience meeting these guys. And then started going to some of the European events. The other thing that happened was my father died when he was 64, 3 months short of retirement. And when I got to age 57, it started to bother me. And I thought, you know what, my kids have finished college, wife is back working, I would like some more time off. So that was just at the time when there was a financial crisis. So I offered to take some unpaid leave to ease the cash flow situation. I had about 35 days holiday a year, and I managed to negotiate 80 days holiday a year, which then freed me up to go to a lot of events. And I started going to like the Far East for a couple of months at a time and stuff like that. That kind of freed me up to go and do things. And one of the first things I did was nothing to do with hashing, but I sailed the Atlantic once as well because the opportunity came up. So yeah, there was
How many how many people were in that?
myself and a couple, so it was three of us. It was a 44-foot yacht.
Nice. That's part one with Blind Doug. We'll catch up on the rest of his hashing adventures next time in part 2.
To close the circle, here's the hash anthem sung by Mother Hash.
Swing low, sweet child.